Hello, Lucy again. Welcome to the figurative drawing section of the programme. It's very exciting to get cracking on a new set of tutorials. I hope you really enjoyed the portraits, self-portraits, and just kind of looking at the features of the face. I hope it was really helpful and you all got something from it. We're going to approach the body and kind of drawing people, the face, but also the body as well. Thinking about all of the body's kind of components and the anatomy and the structure of the body. Drawing it quickly, but also drawing studies. And so we're going to start with focusing on specific body parts. The easiest body part, and often, well, the easiest to access. But often one of the most difficult things to draw, and it's something that people really tend to struggle with, is drawing the hand. Obviously it's something that we use a lot and it's something we're very familiar with. We'll look at our hands a lot. We think about, how they look and decorating them. Maybe not me. I've given up on that a long time ago. Because I use them so much, there's no point really being too vain about my hands. So yeah, I've got particularly liney they're quite good hands to draw actually, so I've taken some photographs of them for reference. But there's something we're really used to obviously using and looking at, but they're quite complex. There's so many moving parts in a hand, there's so many individual complex muscle and skeletal kind of structures that it can be really difficult. Often people really overdraw them, take too much time in a sense. They can become a bit wooden and a bit rigid, and that's the thing, is we want to understand that they're one of the things that we move the most. So that's quite a nice way of thinking about it, is trying to understand how the hands move as well as how they look. So we're going to start with just showing you a few different ways of approaching. I mean, there's no one way. Some people have got some artists have got some very complex, almost mathematical ways of approaching drawing the hand, and breaking it down into its every kind of joint and ligament, and while that can be really helpful, firstly we don't have time to look at it in so much detail, but secondly you can get a bit it can be a bit overwhelming to say the least. So we're going to kind of look at it in broad strokes essentially. And the first approach, I'm just going to show you 2-3 approaches in this tutorial. And the first one is looking at almost moulding it, carving it out of a tone base. I've done a wee example, and apologies if you can see all the finger marks on my tablet here. I took some photographs of my hand just against this table using my mobile phone. Mobile phone's really handy for doing that. You can get really quite close, and then similar to the way that Liz works, where she just to find all the kind of tonal qualities, she makes our picture black and white. I've done that as well with my hand, the photograph of my hand, because it really does. It's very helpful. It simplifies it. You can see where the shadows, the mid-tone, and the highlights are much more easily. And with this approach, that's really helpful because we're looking at form. So yes, this can be quite a nice way of starting. You're almost looking at the negative space. Essentially, you're bringing the hand out of this space rather than a white base and looking at lines. I want you to think more about form and less about lines, because when drawing the hand, actually the less lines the better, and that's something you'll as you build in confidence, and you'll grow in skill, and as you grow in skill you'll need less lines. Your every line starts to count that a little bit more, because it becomes a little bit more accurate and a bit more fluid as you grow in confidence and skill. So yes, so first things first, the materials you'll need. Again, we're working with charcoal just because it's a really kind of malleable material, so I've just got a thin one. I've got my little pot here, basically what you've got here, different widths. I've also got the eraser, and I brought some white chalk along as well. That can be quite helpful at the end. to find your highlights. So I've started with a kind of a medium actually, but it really doesn't matter. And all I've done is I've kind of on its flat end, on its side essentially, I've created just a page of tone. And then I've blended that with my finger. And then obviously I'm not spraying it because I want to remove some of that. Now, I don't want you to expect to do this brilliantly immediately. It's something I want you to just practice with and not take too much time. Don't get too bogged down in these initial studies. The point of a study is that it's a process. You're not just finding out everything from one drawing. You're doing several drawings, and every time you're exploring the subject, you're kind of looking at it from different angles and different approaches. So what I find helpful, actually, you can just go at it with your razor as such, or if you prefer to have something a bit smaller and kind of, it can be quite handy for like the edges, is I tend to cut a section from my razor. It also helps you to get a clean edge as well. You can do that with a putty razor or any razor, just cut a little. You can cut a triangular shape as well, just depends on what you want. Just remember, you're in control of all materials, and how you use them has a it impacts on the end result, even with your erasing. Erasing, think of it as a pen or a piece of charcoal. It has the the same ability to transform. So I've got my reference picture here, but actually I think I might change it to do a new one here because I've already done that picture. So first things first is just to look, and I know that sounds a bit daft, but really take some time and consider the shapes in the hand here. Consider what's happened with that pose. You can reenact that pose if you want. Because I'm taking the picture from above and my hands are going back, if you were to look at that pose on its side, they're going back. It's foreshortening these fingers. These fingers are normally the longer fingers, your index and your middle finger. But if you move your hand, you're creating the illusion that they're shorter. So just assess that. Assess which finger looks the longest. This thumb is quite far forward in the pose, so that's going to look longer, isn't it? You can take some points of reference as well. If you take one part, you can ask yourself, some of those questions. The little finger has been pushed forward, but it's in the foreground, so again it looks slightly thicker than it normally would. It looks about the same size and width as my maybe even this finger or this finger. The ring finger is looking kind of pretty much the longest. And then ask yourself about the actual structure of the hand. Grab your hand and have a feel. Where are the padded areas? Where are the joints? Where are the kind of circular areas? You've got this really large, I think it's called the Mound of Venus if you read palms. This kind of fleshy area here that has a very kind of knobbly joint here. Really pay attention to that there. This area in here. All of your smaller joints here. There's a really large joint here and quite a large joint here. And obviously you've got all of the padded areas in the fingers here as well. So just consider all of them before you draw. So what we're going to do is we're just going to grab our eraser and we're going to start carving out. So here's the wrist here, and we're going to just try and capture it really, really quickly. Try not to spend too long. A few kind of movement lines first with a hand are really helpful. You're not thinking too much about anything. You just, that finger is in that direction. I'm going to do a line there. This finger is in that direction. So it's just slightly more raised than horizontal. So we're going to show that. This line, this finger is, if you think about the horizontal, it's coming slightly down. So we're just going to show that. So we're starting off with that, essentially. We're just marking our territory. But we're not drawing as such, so we're not committing too much. This is still really malleable. We can just do that and it's gone. Rub it and it's gone. Do that and it's gone. We can go in and edit these lines by taking our finger along. We can, if we're not happy, we can draw again and do one line again. So I'm going to change the direction of my erasing just to show that I understand this area is kind of wider, and then my wrist is coming up here as such. I mean, I can take that out later, it really doesn't matter at this point. Okay, and I'm just going to strengthen. It does make a difference if you erase this way or if you erase that way. It kind of adds a bit of weight and a bit of substance. See, I think I've gone really quite far there, so I'm just going to mark that. And then my thumb here. So I've got almost like a kind of ghost hand there, and that's really all I want. That is all I want just now. I want to stop and I want us to think about what our fingers look like now, because we're going to start drawing around. We're going to be drawing to the negative space area, and that's probably my best tip when drawing hands, is to consider the space in between the fingers and to draw that shape rather than this shape. It's amazing how that can transform drawings. Also, don't overdraw the tip as well. Kind of keep your lines quite open at the end, quite fluid at the end, because that can really kind of, when we're talking about the wooden effect, that can really do that. So we're going to pick up just our charcoal again, and we're going to start drawing around this form that we've created, this kind of ghost hand. So we're going to think about these shapes in here firstly. So we're going to think about, it comes kind of down. If you were to pretend that's not even a hand and you're just drawing this shape here, it's something that looks like that, and I just want you to block that in. Don't think about going to the end of the hand too much, and then I want you to think about the width here, and I want you to think about that kind of acute triangle that is created in between these fingers. And then again, I want you to just skip on to the next one, considering where these lines start. It should curve around. They shouldn't all be, if you drew a line from that point down, they're not all coming out from a line, it's curving around. Think about this, around. You might even draw that shape in. That can be really, really helpful. So from this point, if you assess just for a second, remember, keep looking, you've got a much, much wider, if I do this a bit more, you might be able to see that a bit better. We've got a much wider triangle. So I'm just going to, again, I'm not thinking about the ends of the finger, I'm just thinking about that shape. Now you've got another acute triangle in here, and we're thinking about this movement line here, so it's coming out from there. We're drawing that. Okay, so I'm happy with that. We might think about this line. Think about the line of this thumb and the angle. So if we were to draw a straight line, this kind of the bend here, we were to draw a straight line there, consider what the angle is. It's coming about there, and then it bends up, and I want us to always remember that. Think about our thumb, it bends up. In fact, when we bend our fingers out, if we go to the side, they all kind of bend back to an extent. So we're not considering too much the tips at this point, and I want us to just think about that shape in there. Okay, and we're just going to close this off as well. Think about that curve there. I'll just take this out. Okay, we're going to think about that curve. We're not going to dwell too much on the details. Going to just, now I just want you to step back for a minute, and I want you to just assess what you've done. Looking again, you might want to bring these areas down a little bit, you might want to thicken the fingers a little bit, because we've not focused too much on it, you know, absolute definite proportions. You might want to thicken that thumb. Just use your finger to mold your shape that you've got. You might want to just get a more definite shape out of that. There we go. You might want to just refine some of these angles. There we go. So I'm quite happy with that. I think overall, I think that's quite a kind of, this area in the hand is surprisingly large as well. Quite often we draw that too small. I mean, this could be possibly be a little bit big, I'm not sure. I think until when we kind of dig down and we create a bit more detail, we might find, it's a bit thicker there as well, we might find that we end up making that a little bit smaller, but not much, to be honest. Yeah. Okay, so we've got space for this kind of, might even draw in some of these joints in here. We've got this big circle in here. We've got this area in here. There we go. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so that's step one. That is all I want you to do right now. Your next step would be to, you could fix that if you wanted, but I would recommend just leaving it as a kind of moving, changing drawing where you're not kind of deciding, you know, it's perfect at this point. You could pick up your white chalk and start thinking about the highlights where the light's hitting the hand here. There's quite a lot of, oops, excuse me, there's quite a lot of light down in this area. So and you might want to strengthen with your white chalk some of these fingers. I think the struggle with this one hand for me is going to be these two fingers, the kind of slightly foreshortened fingers. That's I would say the trickiest bit about this, is to get it looking, you know, exactly right. It's a bit of a kind of I was going to say a war. That's maybe overstating it. But, you know, it's a wrestling match in a sense. You're kind of pushing things and pulling it back, and the beauty of using this kind of material is you can do that really freely until you're quite happy. But I don't want you to be thinking too much about drawing like all of the lines and all of the detail. I just want you to consider the shape and just keep referring back, you know, thinking about this perimeter here. Have you got it right? If your finger's out here, these ones are going to be here. You can draw in some of these movement lines, and that can really help keep you right. And just, you know, keep drawing, draw it out, rub it out, do it again, and don't be scared of it. Don't fear the marks that you're putting down. They're not permanent, they're temporary, they can be moved, they can be changed. And you might find that you draw, you know, 10 hands until you're happy, until you feel it's getting there. But give it a shot, and the next one will be a different technique. Thanks. Okay, so just a really quick add-on to the tutorial there, where we carved out, essentially we kind of erased into the charcoal the hand. Just considering the hand structure generally, and just the component kind of shapes, having just a bit of an understanding of this and practicing this a little will certainly help inform when you draw the hands and the arms. I mean, it's a really nice way of thinking about approaching drawing. I think it's something that Frank's really focused on as well, is finding form and shape, and when you're stuck, kind of just looking again, finding the shape, simplifying the form, and that can act as a bit of a guide. So I'm just going to kind of colour in the shapes that I've already drawn, so that you can see the different shapes and some of the angles, and just kind of understand and appreciate them. They might not be exactly right. I drew this out pretty quickly, but they should be, you know, semi-accurate. So we've got this really large structure first in here, and it's tempting to draw it as a circle, and you can, you know, when you first start, you know, drawing. Actually, if I pop it here, you can draw it as a, some people do draw it as a circle, just to understand, you know, the bare kind of bones of it, and put in your joints and whatnot. But when you then come to you know, draw it with a little bit more consideration, it's perhaps not the most helpful. So if you add some kind of structure to that a little bit more, you will end up with something that looks a little bit like this. So you've got a kind of a roof shape in a sense. I think about these as roof shapes. There's a bit of a kind of pitched roof shape in here as well, and another one in here where it comes up and then comes back down again. So you're coming up, you're coming back down, and then you're coming down to the bottom of the thumb in here from there. You're coming down, and then you're crossing across the wrist joint, and then you're coming straight up. And you might want to think about that line with a slight curve rather than a straight. In fact, once you start padding these out, you start drawing the hand more, you notice the finesse in it, you know, the kind of more, slightly more accurate details, and the line work of it will represent that. So a bit, in its kind of more simplified sense, it's a bit of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-sided object in a sense. So I'm just going to colour that in just so you can see a bit more clearly. And that might help you as well. I've just taken a photo of my own hand, like so, as reference. So then we've got this kind of shape up here as well, where if you think about, I mean, you could, oops, you could go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but you can kind of pretty much trace this line up to here, and that finger comes over it slightly, but just to get the general sense of it. Then it's coming down again, and then it's coming back. It's curving kind of round slightly at an angle, depending how you straighten your finger. And it's joining up with this joint here. So you've got this area in here. So it's a little bit like a pitched roof. And you can flatten it along there if you want, but actually that's the base of it. So we're looking at this kind of a shape, almost like a folded card, you know, from above. If you put in a line there, it looks a bit like a folded card. So that kind of a shape in there. And then once you've drawn that shape, the borders, you might want to just consider how the, well, we talked before about the negative spaces in between the fingers, how you might want to draw them in just to represent how these fingers actually sit within that shape. And just play around with that for a while until you've kind of got that feeling that, yeah, that's about right. So I'm going to do this in yellow so you can see the drawing through it. So you've got this other shape. And then you've got these, I've separated it into two shapes just to make it slightly easier. You could call this just a triangle essentially there, but I've kind of curved it obviously so you can see, and there's a bit of a kind of a rhombusy, this kind of a shape in there. It's got a square there and a triangle basically, and then it's got another triangle on top. Essentially that's your shape. It's a bit like a baguette, a croissant on its side. So you've got a kind of triangle and then a kind of rhombusy shape here, and you can get a square out of that as well. And that's essentially here, your kind of larger triangle and your smaller triangle, where it joins up with the body of the hand, the palm area. So I'll just quickly colour that in as well. What colour should we go? Should we go for a lighter pink? You can see those little shapes in there. And then obviously you've got where the wrist meets the, well, where the base of the hand meets the wrist and the hand area. So we'll do that blue. So we've got a kind of abstracted version. Bear in mind that there's this wrist bone as well here, and you know, when it's kind of straight like that you might not notice it quite as much, but the minute you start moving at this area in here becomes much more prominent as well. So yeah, so if you get a photo of your hand, just, you know, quite relaxed, straight on, and just practice abstracting this shape, these shapes, and finding them. And practice perhaps doing, you could do 2 or 3 and move your fingers, stretch them out, and see how this affects the shape up here. You're going to have a wider, more fanned out area at the top, with these angles are going to change in here. Consider what it does to this shape in here that we looked at earlier as well, and consider what it does to this shape in here. So just practice that until you've got a feeling of the form of the hand, and you might find that that is super helpful when you come to drawing a more natural pose. Okay, thank you. Okay, the last technique that we're going to look at, you might want to leave this till last, or you might feel confident enough that you just go for this straight away. For people who lack confidence in drawing hands and perhaps using charcoal or using more expressive mark making, you might want to do some of the other studies first until you've kind of loosened up, or you have a bit more of a kind of an understanding of the form of the hand. But this is the more kind of line work approach, where you just go in with some movement lines. You have to be prepared to fail here and to get it wrong, and to just, you know, have that kind of casual attitude about it, because that's very much the approach here, is that we're just responding to the picture, responding to the hand very fluidly, very quickly. Like any technique, you know, the more you do it, the more accurate these lines are going to become. But initially, you know, some are going to be wrong, and just keep putting marks down there. Don't worry about erasing lines. Take your eraser and put it away. If that helps, get rid of the eraser. This is not about challenging every line. This is about responding to the picture and practicing at accurate line work through expressive mark making. It's one of the best ways to become much more confident and able when drawing. So we've got this photograph here. It's a kind of similar image to the first one that I showed you, but it's slightly more simple. You're really only seeing 3 fingers here, but it's quite a nice kind of, it's almost like that classical hand that we've seen so much. It's kind of a familiar pose to us, but just take a second to just consider all of the angles, but don't take too long, and then just start doing some I'm going to take this out actually because it's kind of limiting. Take away any obstacles that are limiting the movement of your hand. You can just hold that page down, move things away, get your shoes off. I'm a bit of a fascist about that. You make it as easy as possible to really use your arm, not just your hand. We're not drawing from the wrist, we're drawing with our arm, and that's the key to expressive mark making and drawing movement lines. Okay, so we're coming in straight away. That's as fast as I want you to be. I don't want you to be considering anything too, you know, these are exaggerations as well. So I've crossed the page here, which is, in a sense, it's made it a little bit more difficult because I've got this kind of valley here that I can't really use. But that's not what this exercise is not about. A beautiful finished picture at the end of it where everything's kind of tied up. It's about relaxing your hand, relaxing your eyes. You know, for me, that's what I wanted to achieve. You could continue to work, you could spray that again and continue to work on that and bring in, you know, more expressive kind of negative space line work where, you know, again, we're not dwelling on it, we're just drawing. You know, we're doing this. We could then, you know, manipulate that and go back into it. We could bring pencil into it and get some exaggerated marks into that. That is the level of drawing I want you to consider when approaching this technique. You know, even put a limit on it, or put a limit of lines on it. Give yourself 20 lines, and you know, it's almost abstracting the hand in a sense. But you'll notice when you go back and you check versus some of these other more technical, sorry, I'm doing that little technical approaches, you'll notice that some of the lines that when you analyze the angles, some of the lines that you actually use in this technique are the most accurate, and sometimes they're the fastest. You're not thinking about it too much, you're looking, you're drawing. For example, this angle here is actually really accurate. It might not, this line might not start at the exact correct point, and if you were to go back over it, you might want to raise that a little bit. But this line again is probably pretty accurate. This line again is pretty accurate. We're just really kind of marking out territories, and that can be a really nice way to start a drawing. If you want to evolve it and you want it to become a very detailed drawing, this can be the bare bones. When you're just sketching out, you know, that often is the best approach when you're drawing the entire body, is to sketch out, get a sense, get a feeling about the drawing first, and then layer on top with detail. You know, you might start with something that looks a little bit chaotic and can be a bit unnerving, but you've got to kind of just relax about that. Trust yourself that you'll be able to kind of, we talk about wrestling again, it's like, it's almost like sculpture, and that's the way to think about it. You're just marking out areas, and then you're building on that. So it's a really, really worthwhile way of approaching figurative drawing generally, and I think we'll start to recognise that in the other tutorials that I show you. Good luck. Cheers. Bye.